And he can carry, so there's like, you know,
Well, he was over here with us.
a little overlap.
Yeah, come to the old school side.
Yeah, this is the.
All right, March 1st, 2022, regular meeting of the Common Council is called to order and roll. Here.
Councilmember Murphy?
Here.
Councilmember Davis?
Here.
Councilmember Riskbenefit?
Here.
Councilmember Schumer?
Here.
Councilmember Person?
Here.
Councilmember Harrington?
Here.
Councilmember Rathke?
Here.
Councilmember Franklin?
Here.
This is how I lose friends. Chief Knapp, would you lead us in the pledge of allegiance?
Absolutely. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we'll go out of sequence just a little bit here. Before we get to petitioners and public hearings, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jorgensen for some good news.
So I have the honor of announcing that we decided, along with the blessing of the County Health Department today, to no longer require masks in our public city buildings. Take your masks off to demonstrate that we want to support and normalize those who choose to wear their mask. I'm going to keep mine on. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, for that good news. And obviously, it's a choice to wear the mask or don't wear the mask. How nice.
Right, yes.
So thank you. So petitioners, do we have any petitions? We do not. There are no public hearings scheduled. There are no petitioners. So I see Danielle McMullen in that's gallery. And if you share your SUNY report with us, that'd be great.
Sure. So, nothing too crazy going on, which is ideal, especially at this moment in time. I just wanted to give a quick update just on where we're at with respect to COVID. We haven't had too many cases on campus, which is ideal. Testing compliance has been pretty high, as well as booster uptake, et cetera. So we're in a really good spot on campus. However, we are going to keep our indoor mask mandate live until March 26th. As you know, we have a lot of both formal and informal party holidays plus spring break. So for the safety of our campus community, as well as the local community, we are going to be keeping the indoor mask mandate until that point in time. Again, we're trying to balance a couple of different things on campus because we see both extremes. We see folks who have wanted the mask mandate to go away months ago, and we have folks who would like to keep the mask mandate probably through the end of the semester. So we're trying to balance both the science behind the transmission as well as the science behind mental health and wellness of our campus community, which is a very diverse community with a lot of different thoughts and feelings about how to best handle COVID. But one of the things, to Diane's point earlier, we are going to be encouraging people to still continue to wear masks because that is something that we do want to normalize on campus so that everyone feels comfortable in that environment. On a non-COVID stance, one of the things that we're doing, and it's been very much in line with President Carday's pledge in the fall when he first came here, to be more engaged with the community. And last week, we kicked off a series of our community breakfasts, and Mayor Jernick and Greg were both in attendance. But we're doing this in order to get a sense of what the community thinks. Key stakeholders and a number of different both elected positions as well as stakeholders in the different industries, both in the city and the county, to see where they feel that SUNY Oneonta can be best utilized as an anchor institution and a college of the community. So lots of exciting stuff coming from that. It's also very much in line with our community dialogues on campus. So I'm doing a lot of good work in that respect. really digging down into some of the meat and potatoes as to where folks feel as though our opportunities are, and where we can go into the future together. So lots of exciting stuff on that end. And I do have a very quick update. Councilman Carson, I don't know if you remember, but I think back in October, you had asked about the alumni field house, or not the alumni field house, but the alumni hall renovation project, and whether or not the council can come take a look at it. Well, it's definitely farther along, and there's definitely more to look at. So we would love to invite the Common Council to come take a tour of the Alumni Hall project, either at the end of March or sometime in April. So I did want to, I promised you that I would follow up on that. There's a lot more to look at now. It's probably more fun. So we would definitely love to invite the council to come and do that. And I'll be coordinating with Mark and Greg and Carrie on some dates. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Are there any questions?
Council? No. Well, thank you so much.
I'm always excited when people don't have COVID questions. This is the first.
So now, second appearance from Diane, the city health officer's report, please.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So, next slide, please. The good news. But I think there's still a lot of explaining to do. So I wanted to just give you some updates and some clarification of what's been a little bit of confusing messaging we've been getting. Can you still all hear me okay? Okay, next slide. So globally, numbers are coming down and even the deaths are coming down, although we're now approximating almost 6 million deaths worldwide from the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. United States, you see the sharp decline from the Omicron spike in cases, which are in red, and then also the lagging indicators, hospitalization and deaths, although we are now approaching almost 1 million deaths. Next slide. New York State, similar curves. You see rapid decline and decline in hospitalization and deaths. Oh, would you go back one slide, Carrie, just for a sec? 60, and again, there are many different metrics in terms of vaccinations, but the one I'll sort of highlight this evening is that 65% of Americans are now fully vaccinated. Next slide, compared to 76% of New York State residents. Next slide. Compared to 61% of Otsego County residents. Just wanted you to have those numbers, so showing that we're pretty far behind. But cases in Otsego County are coming down, which is quite encouraging. Hospitalizations are also declining. I spoke with Bassett folks yesterday. They're now averaging network-wide about 10 inpatient COVID cases, whereas before they were about 20, 25. They're currently, well, as of yesterday, 4 COVID inpatients at Cox Hospital. Deaths, there have been 15 COVID deaths since the first of this year in the county, so that's not insignificant. A couple more were reported this week, so 4 in the last 2 weeks. Next slide. So this is the daily report that you're used to seeing. You will see this if you go to the county website today, March 1st, 13 new cases, 6 hospitalized, no new deaths today. 4.1% 7-day average positivity. That's about double the state positivity, which is 1.9%. Total cases so far this year, 3,800, substantial. Total deaths, again, 15. And you see the graphic, cases are going down, very good news. And now you see community level low. Where did that come from? 2 days ago it was high. And the cases per 100,000 7-day total is above 100. So that used to mean high. So what I'm going to try to do to explain to you this evening is some of the reasoning behind that shift. But before we do that, I'm just going to sort of go back chronologically. So next slide. A couple of weeks ago, February 10th, we saw that our New York State governor announced that the New York State mask mandate for businesses would no longer be in place. Statewide the mask or vaccine requirement. It became optional for businesses, local governments, counties. The reason we kept requiring masks here, as did the county in their office buildings, was because at that point in time, the CDC, given that we were high transmission, was still recommending that all persons wear masks in public indoor settings. So we were following that guidance. But again, the statewide mandate for businesses went away. So if you went to the grocery store, you were no longer required to wear a mask. That doesn't mean that businesses couldn't, and it doesn't mean that businesses still can't ask you to wear a mask when you come into their premises. And importantly, there's still a state requirement for hospitals, nursing homes, shelters, group congregate settings, jails, for masks to be worn. The state also follows the federal mandate for public transportation. All of those are still in place. And schools, when she first made this, were still requiring masks, but that has shifted since too. And as we're going chronologically, I'll get to that. Next slide. This just emphasizes again how masks are still required in nursing home, adult care facilities, correctional facility, you know, all those places where people are really at high risk and are vulnerable populations and are important to protect. And while we still have significant COVID-19 in the community, I think that's appropriate. And again, a lot of people have asked about transportation, our city buses. The TSA is what drives that, following CDC guidance. And currently, a face mask requirement is in place through March 18th. So we may see a revision or continuance of that. We'll let you know. Next slide. So here's the confusing thing. If you go to the CDC website today, March 1st, and you go to what's called community transmission, it still says high, because that metric is based on one of two things: case rate per 100,000, 7 days, and which is ours is 126, or percent positivity. And the numbers are going to be different. You see, this is 5.5. On our county, it was 4 point something, right? But anyway, so that's confusing. I talked to Heidi about it today. She thinks it may change or come off, but it's still there. Next slide. But if you then go to what's called community level, which is what the CDC is using now to guide them in terms of public health measures, you see we're low. And with low comes recommendation that we do not have to wear masks indoors. Next slide. If you're interested, this is a really good slide deck that is accessible from the CDC website that goes through the changes and the rationale behind the changes. So I'm just going to try to summarize it for you really quickly, not to take too much of your time. This came out February 25th last week. Next slide. So old way, high transmission, over 100 new cases per 100,000 in the last 7 days, or a high percentage. Now that percentage is always going to be dependent on the denominator of tests you were doing. So anyway, we've been in high transmission according to this for quite a while. Next slide. So what the CDC decided that these community levels rather than community transmission were more relevant in terms of indicating differences and severe outcomes as what we were really looking to prevent. Like, what is the goal? We want to prevent serious illness, severe outcomes, strain in our hospital capacity. So another way to look at it rather than community level is community burden. What is the burden of COVID in our community right now? So that is a shift. Next slide. So here are those criteria that establishes that. New COVID-19 admissions per 100,000, and that has to do with the severity. How many really sick people do we have in our community? Because we know there may be a lot of COVID, but maybe people aren't getting really sick anymore. Also, the percent of staffed beds occupied, meaning our hospital capacity. So those are the two things that, as we move forward in living with this pandemic, we think are important indicators. Now, why did they keep the new cases per 100,000 7-day? They kept that because they're calling it a leading indicator, meaning it's going to be predictive of when we may get to that place of strain or a lot of severe illness. So this is what they've decided is important in terms of public health guidance. So, and again, right now we are fewer than 200 and I think we meet the other indicators, so we are low. Next slide. And this shows you what the country looks like, really different than what we've been seeing, all that red. Now, there are places in the country that are high, and in those communities and regions, masks are still going to be required or recommended by the CDC. But you see here we are at Siegel County, we're low, and about a quarter of counties in the country are low. Next slide. So this sort of goes over the framework for all of this. The middle left bubble, it talks about those community indicators. That's going to give you your level. But you can see how local metrics can feed into that, like things like wastewater, things like, you know, what may be different about your community that may put you at higher risk. And you can see also down below, local decisions may inform prevention measures. So it's a movement toward, I think for us, a little more local involvement and local specificity in terms of guidance. I think we will probably not see statewide, nationwide mandates, knock on wood, hopefully. But people will be looking to us, their local health people, to help guide us through, and we may need to become more restrictive at some point. No one knows 100%. So again, this is on the CDC site if anyone wants to look at that a little more critically. I think the movement is also toward individual responsibility. You know, if you want to wear a mask, if I want to wear a mask, if grandma's at risk, if my little one's at risk, I'm going to have them wear masks. And I think that's still a really important tool that we have in dealing with this pandemic. So shift toward individual responsibility, shift toward maybe some local decision-making around public health policy. Next slide. Again, how the different, and this is by the CDC, how the different categories pair with guidance. So we're low, so we don't have to do much of anything other than just be aware. And of course, if you're positive or have been exposed, you're going to wear a mask and isolate as required. But otherwise, yeah, next slide. And so then when that all happened, a couple days later, which was like yesterday, New York State did decide that they were going to end the mask requirement in schools. It didn't say that schools had to do away with the mask requirement. It did leave it up to individual cities and districts to make their own choice. What I understand is that pretty much all the school districts in our county have decided to make masks elective. Next slide. And then, oh, this is to clarify the busing because that came up. So on our public buses, yes, masks are still required, but the CDC made it really clear, understanding that school districts would likely start not requiring masks, that school buses were going to align with the schools. So school buses, where there's low or medium community level as opposed to transmission, did not need to require masks. Next slide. And then we heard from SUNY, who's being very thoughtful, I think, in sort of assessing where they're at, because there have been some cases, a little uptick in cases there, and they want to just sort of gauge where they're at before they do away with their indoor mask guidance. Hartwick is set to, I think, make an announcement yesterday. They have not made public their plan relative to requiring indoor masks. They're waiting to review their degree of compliance with their booster mandate for their students. And yes, so the county as of today and us as of today have decided that in our buildings, masks will no longer be required. Next slide. So I just want to do a couple updates about vaccines because I am concerned that our vaccination rate is so low, and that's one of the features that have allowed Suni to, be a little more comfortable, and it's one thing that makes me a little less comfortable about where we may be headed in terms of ongoing transmission. So next slide. Some recent changes, and I put these up. There's a lot in there, but I put this up because it speaks to the point that the CDC is still very carefully monitoring data regarding adverse effects from vaccines. I pointed out to you, I think one or two of my last presentations, how that they stated that the mRNA vaccines are preferred over the J&J because of the very rare but serious side effect of blood clots that happened with the J&J. And this the last couple of weeks, they've added this consideration on top because of the, again, low but real reports of the heart effects, the pericarditis, myocarditis, particularly in young men from those who get the mRNA vaccine. They've looked at all that data quite critically and come out with a recommendation that an 8-week interval may be more appropriate, especially for the men in that 18 to 39 age range, simply because they found that by extending the interval, that complication with the second dose is a little less common. Now, what I mean by that is that even with the standard interval, the number is 68 per million. It's very, very rare. And the risk benefit analysis of that is that you're much more likely to be hospitalized or have severe COVID than you are to get myocarditis from the vaccine. But nonetheless, they're looking at it very carefully and trying to just, parcel out the risk benefit. And so because of that, they're saying perhaps 8-week interval is better. That also has been shown to have maybe even better immune boosting properties. So again, the CDC is continuing to look very critically at risks associated with vaccines. Overall, vaccines have proven to be very, very safe and very effective at preventing severe disease and hospitalizations. I keep saying that. Next slide. So again, vaccines are highly effective. We are behind the 8 ball in Otsego County. Anything we can do to help educate the public and encourage people to be vaccinated, I think, is a good thing. As the winter surge recedes, getting vaccinated and boosted remains critical to continue the progress we've made. That's the New York State Health Commissioner's quote. Next slide. So finally, yes, we can throw away our masks in most settings, but I just want to say that COVID-19 is still with us. It's still present in our community. And I like this. This is from the New York State Department of Health website today. Check with local health authorities. So see, they aren't giving us, the local people, something, it's not a responsibility to really make sure that we're making the right kind of guidance. We'll continue to monitor the wastewater. Our last report was from a couple of weeks ago, but it was trending downward, which is good. Still quantifiable, but trending downward. And we'll continue to look at our local hospitalizations. And now I'll take any questions.
Yeah, Dr. Jorgensen, I think one of the things that's really, I think one of the great tragedies of this pandemic is the vast amount of mass misinformation that's out there. And I'm glad you brought up myocarditis because it's anecdotal, but I have a lot of friends and family members that complain about the risk of myocarditis. But I guess this is just for my own edification. Isn't it also true that you're at risk for myocarditis without the vaccine? Like, isn't it public? I've read that it's also possible that your risk for developing myocarditis is high with COVID.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, they've done the risk benefit analysis. There's also a slide deck all about that on the CDC website if you want to look at it. But now that, yes, you're more likely to get myocarditis from COVID, and you're much more likely to become severely ill from COVID than you are to develop myocarditis from the vaccine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Dr. Jorgensen? Thank you so much. All right, we'll move on now to boards and commission reports, and we'll start with the airport commission.
Thank you, Mayor. We met February 16th of this year. Yes, I don't have notes. I apologize. It was a very short meeting. Last week, I'm drawing a blank of what we actually talked about. Okay. Thank you. The automated weather observing station. We received a federal aviation administration grant of $900,000. And we've been working for quite some time with our airport engineer, McFarland Johnson, to press that number in. I think it's a grant that maybe tonight we can talk about it or at another time, but the city's financial position right now, this is a grant that rather than saying no to, we could say yes and postpone the enforcement of it. The engineer is telling myself and others that the real number is around $500,000 for the work rather than $1 million. I think that's what was presented before, was $1 million. So until I have some firm numbers, but it's at some point in the near future, we're gonna have to make a decision about the grant. And again, like we've talked about this before with grants, is that if you say no to it, then you're putting out a signal to that agency when you're applying for other grants later on. So we could say yes, but not invoke it until a year or two down the line where our finances are in a better position. And I'm trying to work it where the funds that Senator Schumer has guaranteed the airport, which are $790,000. Some of that could be applied towards our contribution. But we're still working out those details, so not solid there.
What are you saying is the city's contribution? Are you saying that the grant was 900?
It would be 10% on the federal, so it would be $90,000 and $900,000. Okay. The original number that came out, I think from McFarland Johnson, was going to be $1 million. I don't know where that confusion came from, but the number he's given me the other day in my notes, I had $500,000.
Okay. And then we'd be on the hook for another 20 years.
40, 50,000. Yeah.
Or is it is it a grant that's requiring us to keep the airport open for an additional amount of time? Because some of the grants we've gotten for the airport, that's the stipulation also. Or is that
Right.
not?
We're accepting money every year from the federal government. That's how we pay our engineers, right? We don't actually use city taxpayers for that.
Right, but sometimes the federal money that we take on, they give us the money, and then the only requirement is we have to keep the airport open, agree to keep it open and fund it for an additional amount of time. So I was just wondering if that's one of those.
Yeah, if I can jump in here, the federal regs say that anytime you take $1 from the federal government as a grant for an airport, you commit to continuing operating the airport for additional 20 years. So it's not that some are and some out.
So all of them are.
Every single one.
And that's what I'm saying. Every year, I think it's 150,000 we're allocated from the federal government. That's how we pay our engineering.
Right. Any other questions for? No. Okay. Moving on to the planning commission, Councilmember Riskbenefit.
Yes. Planning commission met on February 16th. We had 3 items for discussion. The first was 3238 Rose Ave. This is the Oneonta Tennis Club property. And the owner would like to propose to subdivide the parcel into 4 separate parcels. So this is something that he brought forward before, and in this meeting we classified it as an unlisted action and therefore did not need a coordinated review. That was passed, and then the application was to split into 4 parcels was passed. Second was 42 River Street. This is a potential new owner from Boston Spa. This is the Fodes building. And the review was for a seeker and site plan review. They proposed to construct a vestibule in the front of the building. And this is approximately a 32 square foot vestibule. That way, in the wintertime, it keeps cold air out and would allow for more seating. So they haven't closed on the property yet, but it was a type 2 action, which is passed. And they waived the minimal parking requirement because there's plenty of parking around the back of the building. And lastly was 454 Main Street. This is Dr. Sinich. And this was, he proposed the installation of a parking area. This is a parking area that was actually done before. So we did the seeker and the site plan review on it. That was a type 2 action. And so the site plan is to install a 5 to 7 foot wooden privacy fence within the next 90 days. And it will be extending the width of the back of the property. So that's passed.
Luke,
Yeah, just to verify, Dave, for 454 Main Street, that was 90 days as of, what day did you folks meet?
That was the 16th.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Dave? Okay, very good, thank you. Moving on to the Zoning and Housing Board of Appeals, Councilmember Rafter.
The group met on November 18, and two issues. One is they need to elect a new chairperson, but for a couple of reasons, they decided to postpone that election until their next meeting. In terms of applications, there was only one application, and it was for an address at 28 Franklin Street, and it was for a short-term rental. And that request for the variance was rejected. And one of the things, and I bring this up because Mark Davis had given me a call a couple of weeks ago about people who were buying properties, knowing something about some of the rules and regulations, ordinances that govern those. And there was, again, a claim, and I was on zoning for a number of years. And when something like this comes up where there's clearly an ordinance or zoning ordinance against short-term rentals, people can claim that the realtor told them it could be a short-term rental. We have no verification of that one way or the other, what the realtor said. But Mark's suggestion was that somehow, if there was some way that new homeowners or purchasers of property could receive information from the city, it might behoove them to be on a firmer footing about shoveling and parking and that sort of thing. I don't know really what can be done about that, but Mark did bring it up, and whether there's a responsibility or some facilitation that we could have in place. We might be able to prevent some of that if it's in fact happening. So just thought I'd bring that up because Mark made a good point about the people falling into problems with shoveling or other kinds of things that they didn't realize were required.
Any questions for John?
I'm curious, our short-term rental, can you define that? What does that mean? You're not allowed to have a short-term rental, and is that like an Airbnb kind of thing? That's not allowed.
Short-term rentals are any rentals under 2 weeks, I believe.
Okay.
So
And
so
30 days, is it?
I saw your mouth
30
move.
days it was.
30 30
Less
days,
than 30 days.
less than
That's
30
prohibited?
days.
Yes.
It's prohibited if you're in an R, well, it's permitted in, not in R2 zones or R1 zones. But variances can be sought if you're in an R2 zone. They're not easy to get because zoning is, clearly on that particular street, given the size of the lot and the house, if you permitted that person to have a short-term rental, everybody on the block could have one.
It's also related to residency, owner residency.
Oh, well, it's related to, no, I don't want to go into it.
Yeah, I feel like it's something that's very complicated that I can
Yeah,
look
there
into
are-
further, I guess was just curious, so.
But there was an
Yeah, that would be
an
really fun.
excellent zoning and presentation done by David Mersey. Reluctantly, but thoroughly.
It's a good trade.
Yeah, but it would be good to, if you're interested in that, to
I am, because I feel like that could be an income for some people, and.
It's an income for life.
Right, exactly, especially with the amount of tourism and with Cooperstown and everything, and so.
And lots of people parking out in front of the houses.
Well, there's pros and cons to everything, I'm just kind of curious about it, I guess.
be happy to talk to you.
Great, I look forward to it.
Any other comments, questions for John after? No? All right, very good, thank you. We'll move on to committee reports then, and Councilmember Davies with the Community Wellness Committee.
Thanks, Mayor. The Community Wellness Committee met on February 17th. We're still trying to get our arms around this big task of how we're going to proceed. So we wrapped up our review of some of our social issues, the discussion that we had from our meeting in January. And this is kind of a free-flowing conversation, a lot of this. So this conversation was wide ranging. We also talked about homelessness in Oneonta, and a lot of time about some of the supports that are in place for homelessness. We also heard from Luke, who done some research and had some of the data available to inform us about some of the homelessness within Oneonta. We also are forming an advisory group to advise the committee, experts, local experts. So we talked a little bit about the scope of that committee. And it was determined that I would proceed kind of working on putting together the advisory group. We also had a data review where Luke then provided all the information that he'd researched, again, giving us a lot of great information with regards to the data of poverty and homelessness within our area. Then we talked about future agenda items. We also agreed that we're going to create a survey, and Luke is working on that. And then we're also looking at other communities and how they've addressed some of the different issues, and Emily is taking the lead on that. So we kind of have division of responsibility, and we're moving forward. So we should have by the next meeting a fully formed, hopefully, advisory committee and some great data, and also some survey, as well as some information about other communities. So we will hopefully be able to hit the ground running on our next meeting. And that's it. Thank you.
I love the work that you're doing. Does anybody have any comments, questions? Mark? Really excellent work you're doing. All right, moving on to the Quality of Life and Infrastructure Committee, Councilmember Riskberger.
Yes, we met on February 22nd. We had a number of topics. We did not get through all of them. We ran out of time. Destination Oneonta gave a review of upcoming events in the coming months. April 9th, there's a scheduled visit with the Easter Bunny. May 6th, there's a movie night in Huntington Park outside the library. And then we had a discussion about summer Saturdays, which will be, I believe, May 14th, June 11th, July 23rd, August 13th, and September 17th. September 17th is going to combine with, I believe, the Keno Arts Festival. There may be some combinations of other events with one or two of the other weekends also. And there was a discussion about survey from Main Street businesses after last summer's Main Street closings. That was provided, and if anybody would like a copy of that, we can get you a copy of that. We then moved on to a conversation about the deer in Oneonta. The Environmental Board provided the report to the committee. they believe ultimately the decision and recommendation is out of their jurisdiction and it belongs in the hands of the council. I reported that one person that was leaving a significant amount of food out for the deer within the city limits was discovered and given a warning by OPD. So we're hoping that that does not happen again. Everyone felt that we had discussed about in our last meeting about having a survey to the public to decide whether or not the deer issue is an actual issue. And everybody on the committee felt that the survey will not necessarily be helpful, as certain wards have a deer problem while other areas do not have a deer problem. Then the mayor had spoken with other representatives from other municipalities at the recent council mayor's meeting, and he was provided with information on what other communities have done. So the plan going forward is to review those options from other communities and then discuss that next meeting. Lastly, we had a brief discussion about the housing studies review that was given to us by the Housing Commission, their draft recommendations. But since those recommendations were written, the chair has actually changed. So I reached out to Ed May, who is the new chair, to see if the draft recommendations from the commission have changed since he took over. And Scott has said that he would have the commission ask the mayor to host a special council meeting regarding housing. I did receive an email from Ed May today, and I just haven't had a chance to review it yet. So, but once I do, I'll reach out to everybody else in the committee. So, and then the last item that we had was community gardens, but back on table. So that will be on the agenda for the next meeting.
Any questions for Dave? Yes. Lynn?
I'm sorry, so did you have a final conclusion on the deer issue, or is it just preliminary talks?
Preliminary talks. It's my own opinion is the deer conversation is it's a third rail conversation, because what the DEC always recommends is the ultimate way to take care of the deer is not a way that most people want to take care of the deer. So we're trying to reach out and do other things, whatever can be done, education, mainly to try to limit the impact on that the deer are having in downtown. But the problems that we're having downtown with deer are not unique to Oneonta. It's issues that cities all across the country are having, partly due to the fact that the number of hunters that we have has dropped off drastically. So it's not like it was 50 years ago. There were a lot more hunters out there. So.
I did want to say one thing, because I think I reached out to Mark Davies about this, not knowing that you were the chair of this committee, my apologies. But, you know, as far as education for the public, if you wanted to kind of gather some information about like, don't feed the deer or something like that, and if you needed help like designing a postcard, you know, you could go to the mailing the post office and they'll like send, you know, you can pick different zones and mail it out as like a marketing thing. And I'm a graphic designer and I'd be happy to help you, you know,
Well,
design something.
Thank you, and we may do that. Originally, I believe we'd asked the environmental board to write something up that we could send out as a nixle.
Okay.
But it hasn't happened. So we can have that discussion and see what we want to do.
Sometimes getting something,
Yeah.
you know, in print can just be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, well, I think we've only touched the edge of.
Sure,
education
but
so
just
far.
figured I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions, comments for Dave on this? In that case, we'll move on to Councilmember Carson and the Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Mayor. We were scheduled, unfortunately, two of our guest speakers canceled on us about 72 hours before our meeting. This was kind of a shock because we had been talking with them, conversing, and thought we were in line. It was a miscommunication. They're scheduled for March's meeting. But since then, Councilmember Katie Lepari-Shu has given material to both Emily and I on possibility. The mayor's asked me to reach out to someone that's local that wants to participate in an economic development conversation. Just got to find out his background before we bring it forward, but that was the extent of what's happening.
And do we have a new date for the, is it mid-March or are you going to be? It's not moved up at all, so we're still on
27
is on the 22nd. Any,
Right, that is the date that we all agreed to, March 22nd.
do we have any other questions, comments for? Okay, then Len will stay with you and for the Finance and Human Resources Committee.
Thank you. We met February 22nd, and from that meeting, we have motions 3 through 8. Questions?
Questions? With the 3 through 8.
I guess I also want to just let the council know that I did ask again to the city administrator about any retirements coming up and also recognizing long-term employees. Just make it work for us
To do that is a great segue. Thank you, Len, because we're going to turn now to the city administrator for his report.
Thanks, Matt. Few updates, and I guess that is a good segue because we have had a recent retirement. Actually, yesterday was Terry Gregory's last day in the police department. She served as a police officer since 2001. She's the first female officer to retire from OPD. Had a very distinguished career with us. She's investigated and closed many criminal cases. Is known for having an knack of working with victims and empowering them to pursue their offenders. She's made more contributions to the department than the city that can be summed up in a brief statement. But she has the sincere thanks for all the staff at the department for professionalism and dedication to her profession and the city. Thank her for her contribution. Jumping back, Ginny had shared with me, we did get the final sales tax report for 2021 overall. Collected $5.37 million, which was $1.25 million above our budget amount for 2021. Total in 2020 was $4.43 million. So obviously we're quite a bit higher from what there's been access of 28%. Anything else you want to share on that, Jamie?
I'll just be coming in probably in April to ask for what we can reserve. Just don't want you to forget about that.
Thank you. Yeah, and during the budget discussion, we had discussed briefly dedicating some of that surplus to reserves, and we decided at that time to bring it back around April for the discussion. So I'll go for the finance.
Excuse me, Greg, can you give that number again? It was 1.1.
Total collected in 2021 was 5.37.
And it was how much over the budget?
1.25. Following the recent winter storm, DPW is scheduled to come in early this Friday at 9 minutes and 30. They'll be into snow banks downtown. They won't have a full crew. They've got 3 volunteers that guys are going to do this a little bit quicker than otherwise we could do contractually. So we'll be able to clear from along parking areas on Main Street from Grants and Market, South Main Street, Ford Ave and East, or Ford Ave and D Street from Main to Walnut, and Chestnut Street from Main to Walnut. Unfortunately, there's some temperatures forecasting above freezing temperatures for the next few weeks. The last thing I want to share was just our employment opportunities right now. We're still accepting bus driver applications. We have posted the community development assistant position and we'll see if there's some dispatches. Anything else to share? Any questions?
Any questions for Greg? I have a quick comment, which is that the clearing of the snow from the curbs and the speeding up of that process is a direct result of a conversation that Greg had with several of the stakeholders downtown. It's a very nice connection, very solid kind of conversation, and very positive in the whole. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's my job. So that's great. All right, and that takes us to the mayor's remarks, which are a written situation here. The first week of April is the Week of the Young Child. It's an annual celebration sponsored by the National Association of the Education of Young Children, the world's largest early childhood education association with nearly 60,000 members and a network of 52 affiliates. The purpose of the Week of the Young Child is to focus public attention on the needs of young children and their families, and to recognize the early childhood programs and services that meet those needs. Is there anything more important than our community's children? Anybody say no? They are, as is said, our most precious resource. And in this grown-up world of unspeakable evil, they are a continual reminder that innocence and aspiration, open minds, and accepting hearts, dreams, and imaginations are just as much a part of life, and one that must be celebrated and nurtured. Over a dozen Christmas seasons, I had the opportunity to interact with our area's children in a way that few do. Hear about their lives, what they like, and what they love about living in Oneonta. One of the bittersweet aspects of my being mayor is that I needed to relinquish that unique connection to our young families. But in anticipation of the Week of the Young Child, the mayor's office will be soliciting the stories, poems, drawings, and digital creations of our local children, asking, what do you love about living in Oneonta? Now, if they send those to my attention, drop them off at City Hall and make calls. They will get a thank you and a certificate from the mayor. We will decorate City Hall, we'll post to our social media and our websites, and provide to our local merchants who've already volunteered to create displays in their windows during the Week of the Young Child. We know that children are the best of ourselves. And as a city, as a village, we're committed to their well-being, their nurturing, their education, and their entertainment. And to that end, I want to thank Dr. Cardehi and SUNY Oneonta for their generosity in providing the Morris Conference Center for a preliminary discussion of the creation of a children's museum in downtown Oneonta. We have over 24 local agencies attending, and more as RSVPing every day. But anyone with an interest in the conversation is invited to attend. It's the morning of March 14th. You will need to RSVP by Friday of this week. To reach out to me or to Carrie here so we can properly plan to accommodate everyone. I'm at mayor@oneonta.ny.us. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the kids out there. What do you love about living in Oneonta? And I'm anxious to hear from the community about this or any way that we can make Oneonta a better place to raise a family. And now, moving on to the consent agenda.
What was the date on that?
Yeah.
And say again, March 14th,
March 14th.
but we do need to know by the end of this week.
I was wondering, what is the week of the young child?
The Week of the Young Child is the first week of April. so
Okay,
April
that's what I
2
thought.
Through the 8th. Any other questions on that before I move to the consent agenda?
No, but can we back up to the city administrator for a second? With the retirements, do we do anything for our staff when they're retired?
Do anything as far as recognition?
Yeah.
Amongst the departments, usually the department heads will kind of coordinate that, or the staff. in that department will have some sort of department. But one of the things we've been talking about, talked a little bit there, reaching out to our staff to see what they might like to see done with it. Some staff might like a formal recognition. Council meeting, some might shy away from that, might do. So I think that's something we can reach out and solicit input on staff themselves and kind of come back to lunch request.
Just yeah, it might be nice, like if the council could put together a letter, we could all come in and sign it to let them know thank you for everything that they do. And, you know, maybe some.
Something good.
Okay, Okay, well, it's tough to follow Johnny Cash, but I'm gonna do that anyway. References lost on you. You're all so young. All right, moving on to the consent agenda. We'll start with number one, approval of the minutes. Motion that the common council approves the minutes of the regular meeting held February 15th, 2022. Number two, approval of the warrants. Motion that the common council approves the warrants totaling $536,561.65, and that the same is placed on the Director of Finance desk for payment as presented. From the Finance Human Resources Committee, number three, that the common council authorizes the mayor to execute memorandums of understanding with the Oneonta Professional Firefighters Local 2408 IAFF, United Federation of Police Officers, Inc., affiliated Local 408, City of Oneonta Police Sergeants Association, and United Federation of Police Officers, Inc., affiliated Local 764, the Oneonta Police Benevolent Association, Inc., to modify the terms of respective collective bargaining agreements to recognize amendments to New York State Labor Law 201-D as it pertains to the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, subject to review by the city's Labor Council. Number four, that the Common Council appoints Timothy Cruzo to the position of Records Management Clerk at a base salary of $43,263, CSEA grade 12, effective March 2nd, subject to the satisfaction of all applicable civil service requirements. Number five, that the Common Council approves the purchase of a police patrol car in the amount of $50,921.91 from Van Wortel Ford of Rochester, New York, under a cooperative contract through Onondaga County bid 8771-2022. The council further authorizes this purchase to be funded from the Public Safety Reserve and authorizes any necessary budget adjustments. Excuse me. Motion number six, that the Common Council authorizes the purchase of vehicle fuel and fuel oils during 2022 based on unit prices bid that were submitted by Bravado Energy Products and Services, Binghamton, New York. Motion number seven, that the Common Council authorizes the purchase of propane during 2022 based upon unit prices bid that were submitted by Nolan Bottle Gas of Robina, New York. Motion number eight, that the Common Council approves the purchasing agent's recommendation to award the bid for the leak noise correlator equipment to the lowest responsive qualified bidder, Eastcom Associates, Branchburg, New Jersey, in the amount of $37,150. And that concludes our consent agenda. Are there any council members who wish to remove an item? All right.
No, I'm good. I was.
Oh, you're good. All credit to Carrie here. Are there any council members that wish to remove any items? There are none. So with
I'll make a
that,
motion.
I'm sorry.
I'll make a motion.
Oh, look at you jumping ahead.
Second.
All right. Motion and followed up by Katie. All right. So with that, we'll call vote. And Carrie, if you would.
Councilmember Murphy.
Aye.
Councilmember Davies.
Yes.
Councilmember Risberger.
Yes.
Councilmember Carnation.
Aye.
Councilmember Carson.
Yes.
Councilmember Harrington.
Yes.
Councilmember Robinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Butler.
All right. Okay, well, that all passes. Now I'll ask if we have any additional business or council discussion.
Yeah, I'm sure most of us have watched the news in the past week. There is a tremendous crisis going on in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. And something that has really crossed my mind is a lot of people are asking what they can do to help, what can we do to help. And it's really kind of brought to the forefront the idea of what some of our neighboring communities are doing. But I just want to give you the statistic really quickly. There are about 500,000 potential refugees coming out of Ukraine, which is a horrible and bloody conflict. That is less than 2% of the world's refugee population, which is at 26 million right now. If we include displaced persons, that's an additional 82 million people. to that. As of the end of 2022, and that doesn't include conflicts that have arisen since then, such as Tigray, as well as Ukraine. One thing I'd like to ask the council to consider is for us to see what it might involve for us to becoming an asylum city for refugees. Our neighbors not far away in Utica have done it. I've had the opportunity to visit the refugee center in Utica when I was in grad school. And it adds a lot to a community. And hopefully some folks will consider staying in the something for discussion, or it's a big problem. We certainly, sadly, don't have room for 102 million people, but we might be able to start thinking about ways that we can welcome some of the populations in the world that are really suffering into a place that's a little bit less worked on.
Look, there's a refugee task force that has been meeting for, I think, about 4 months now, and Deb Marcus is chairing that. And if you want, I can see whether or not I can get you into the Zoom calls.
Oh, that'd be great, yeah. Sure. Thank you.
Well, the other thing is too, I think they're coming to a presentation in the house.
Right.
Next one.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other council discussion or additional business? All right, do we have any correspondence?
No.
No correspondence. So is there a need for executive session?
I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session to talk about specific personnel items.
Do we have a second? That's Luke.
For the same, similar reason. I don't know if we're referencing the same issue, but yes.
Don't think we are.
So motion to go to executive session. I'd like to ask for someone to make a motion to go to executive session to discuss medical information related to the specific.
All right.
So are we gonna do that?
No, we'll just, we'll break them in. All right, so with that, go into executive Okay, council is back in session. We have a motion that Katie will read, and we'll look for a second once that motion is ready.
Motion that the council, okay, motion that the common council authorizes the mayor to execute a memorandum of agreement between the city and the Oneonta Professional Firefighters Local 248 IAFF, assigning employee 024229 to light duty effective March 2nd, 2022.
Second, Luke is the second. Any discussion? No, and with that.
Councilmember Murphy.
Aye.
Councilmember Davies.
Yes.
Councilmember Risberger.
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall.
Aye.
Councilmember Carson.
Yes.
Councilmember Harrington.
Yes.
Councilmember Left.
Aye.
Councilmember Falcon.
Okay, if there is no further business, and there isn't.